What's up, guys?
It's Rowan
and Terry
here from Artismart TV, bringing you
another episode of the HSC Economic Review.
Now, in this episode, this is part 2 of our series on the Australia-China relationship, the deteriorating relationship. And in this episode, we're going to be looking at the impact of the relationship that has been falling apart across really 2019 and 2020. If you want to know the details on what's been happening, you know, the escalating trade tensions and tariffs and diplomatic gaffes and the like, go and watch part 1. We'll make sure it's linked below. That'll give you a good sense of the history of what's going on and the different tariffs and policies that have been implemented. This episode is going to dive in and look at, well, what is the impact of these tariffs? What is the impact of these, accusations of dumping and restrictions on Australian timber and Australian lobsters and Australian wine and barley and iron ore and coal, and the list goes on. Now, to kick this off really quickly, I think the important thing, and the reason why we want to look at this because it's so critical, is that according to DFAT, China is Australia's largest two-way trade partner. Now, different stats exist, but DFAT says it's over 27% of Australia's trade with the world is with China. Now, you'll see some that take that up into the low 30s. Yeah. So clearly, Australia's relationship with China is very, very important, and therefore, as we're starting to see some of this protection and trade restrictions come in, it has the potential for significant implications for Australia. So, Terry, where do we start with some of the impact on Australia?
I just want to add on to, how you were saying the low 30s? I think the low 30 figure you're referring to is the exports. So Australian exports to China has pretty much always been larger than Australia's imports from China.
True.
So we export usually about a third. They make up about a third of our total exports.
That's right. And then overall, imports and exports, yes, we get to
the math. Yeah.
We get to DFAT, right? DFAT's numbers are 27%. Yeah. Which either way, I mean, it's still ridiculous, isn't it? Yeah. In terms of the sheer volume.
By far. Easily our largest trading partner.
That's right. So,
kick things off.
So what does this mean? We've got, restrictions on wine, as we talked about. We've got restrictions on barley, lobsters, commodities sitting in, boats, tankers, for weeks, not getting access to Chinese ports. What is the risk of all of this for Australia?
Well, it really just undermines the free trade agreement, which we signed originally in 2015. And that was obviously signed, if we go back to the theory in the course, what does a free trade agreement do for you? Well, it boosts your overall levels of trade, which therefore allows you to boost both countries' levels of economic growth and development. And so if you start to undermine that, then you're essentially going to be reversing some of that progress you've made. And especially given that we're we're still in a COVID environment, we need whatever growth we can get. And so if we're going to go ahead and start undermining that relationship, it's going to put a significant challenge, I think, on our recovery.
That's right. And I think to just zoom into that context, if we look GFC, we had a soft landing, 1 quarter, no technical recession, we recover. And most of that is credited to the fact that we then see, mining boom 2 occur, right? We see huge demand for commodities from China. And that really, played a significant role in causing economic growth, employment growth in Australia. Sure, it created some inflationary pressure alongside it, but overall it was seen as the thing that, really dragged us into a position where, we maintained our economic growth and a very enviable record. Clearly, COVID has had a much bigger impact on the Australian economy. Clearly, Australia's economic growth as a result of COVID has taken a much more significant impact. We actually enter a technical recession.
Yeah, and it's interesting because China's actually done a little bit better. So for the whole year of 2020, they actually grew by 2%. So it looks like, they're in a better position to have this kind of conflict than we are.
Well, it's also with the trade war with the US as well that China's been undergoing. So certainly the concern then is if we're starting to see this happen and it threatens trade, it really does, as Terry's highlighted, really threaten our ability to recover economically. Now, that's also important because a lot of the government predictions, in terms of their policy decisions at the moment in the budget, for example, that we saw in October 2020, are founded upon their expectations and forecasts of growth, which is also based on, the global economy and their expectations of taking advantage of trade. So may mean that if we start to see, and we're going to look at some of the numbers shortly, Australia see a reduction in trade. It's going to have an impact on our economic growth. It's going to dampen it, certainly, and that's going to then place increased pressure on particularly fiscal response. To actually spend more to try to stimulate growth domestically, because we're not able to rely on that relationship as much with China.
And it's already really been, like, our fiscal spending has already really carried through us through 2020. There is a problem with that, of course, which is that your debt levels start to rise, your debt to GDP gets unsustainable, and then that leaves you very vulnerable to a financial crisis.
That's right. Now, to give you a sense, in terms of how important the free trade agreement has been to Australia, the value of Australian exports to China doubled in 5 years. From 2015 when we signed it to 2020, it doubled, which was crazy. It went from 75 billion to 150 billion. So as Terry said, what we're starting to see is some of that get ratcheted back, and some of those gains go backwards. Now, if we take a look at what's the sort of total value of trade that has arguably been threatened by these, restrictions and tariffs from China.
So if we add up all the wine, the beef, the barley, timber, lobster, coal, and whatever else, is going to get added onto that list, we're looking at probably at least $20 billion worth of exports. So if you think about that's 150 billion over 5 years, the 20 billion of that's getting taken out. Where are you going to find that 20 billion? Like, you know what I mean? Like, you got to find $20 billion somehow. Now, the alternatives are that we start to explore other countries, like exporting to other countries. But just from what they saw with the barley, they were receiving a lot less money on that export compared to if they were exporting it to China. So even if we do find other countries, we're not going to get 20 billion.
That's right. So pretty concerning.
Yeah.
Okay. Now that obviously has some flow-on effects. Okay. To dive in just specifically, and if we look at like red meat, there was some restrictions around the red meat and the abattoirs as well. That alone was considered to be sort of 3 billion. Okay, for a single industry. So we start to splice it. Now that was largely up to about 8 abattoirs and meat processing. So you can see that particular businesses get hurt a lot, right? The larger exporters, fundamentally in Australia, the ones that are more competitive, they've taken the economies of scale, and so they saw that sales for meat, for example, had fallen 30% year on year, which was incredible. Okay, we see the same thing with wine. The wine exports to China total $1.26 billion. And we saw that basically, the wine was almost entirely priced out of the market. Okay. Which was pretty significant. So the concern then is, that has flow-on effects.
Yeah, and I think it's important to also understand that with exports, it's really difficult to find a new country to export to, right? Because they will have their own regulations. They will have, you'll have to sign your own deals. Like it's not as easy as just saying, we're gonna just instead of sending a ship to China, we're gonna send it to India.
Yeah, we put up a website that targets like a new country, and they just start buying online.
Yeah, there's a lot of bureaucratic stuff that's in the middle of all this. So even if we do recover, it's gonna take time.
That's right.
And we don't exactly have the luxury of time right now.
That's right. Given we're in the midst, of a crisis, right, in terms of COVID, and so. Definitely, another time, economically it might have been a different story. Yeah. So the flow-on effect is that, these businesses have less trade. Yeah. They have less trade into the medium term until they can, find new buyers. That has an impact on employment. Yeah.
They have to lay people off, and they probably also will delay their decisions to invest. And so they're also going to be set back, quite a few years in terms of their growth and their productivity.
And so I think it's important to highlight, one, yes, COVID exacerbates the unemployment issue, and it is hard to get a read at the moment on the data. There's a lot of noise, between is it, what was COVID, what was, the restrictions. But I think the big thing that we're seeing is that it certainly has that impact on employment. And with investment, one of the key drivers in an economy, consumption being the big one, but alongside it, is the level of investment. Australia's business investment over the next year is off a cliff already. It was minus 14% or something, in terms of growth. Like, it was a concern, which is why a lot of the government's fiscal policies around like the instant asset write-offs, like unlimited, they did a lot of stuff around like encouraging businesses to invest. Yeah. You see a lot of these, or like, because it's so many industries that are getting impacted, like they're not going to want to invest.
Yeah, exactly. That's like, you're just not going to. Like, if you're missing 3 billion, where are you going to get 3 billion?
That's right. It doesn't matter, if the government's giving you a couple of extra tax advantages on the side here, the economic uncertainty is just so significant that I think we're going to see a bigger impact and a bigger drag on business investment in the Australian economy, which will require the government to then do more at a policy response level as well. So there's some other things here that we sort of identified. I mean, total exports, value of exports, okay. They're still up though, which is sort of a little interesting, aren't they? Right. So the data here shows that September quarter, they still jumped 23% compared to the same period the previous year. So, there's a lot of noise right now. There's certain industries that are being impacted, but it seems like other industries, the demand's still growing, which is why this is sort of a sort of tense game. It's almost very passive aggressive, like we'll put Australia off balance, we'll buy some, we'll continue to buy lots of some stuff.
Yeah. And not buy any of the other.
That's right, but still place pressure on them as a result. Now, to what extent does China account for jobs in Australia?
So we've got here that it's 1 in 13 Australian jobs. So that is a huge, huge amount. So if you think about if China pulls away, if I can do my maths correctly, that you're looking at like a 7% jump in unemployment straight away.
Yeah. So it's significant. Now, of course, it may not lead to, every one of those 13, right? But certainly it places ongoing upward pressure on that unemployment rate that's already, quite elevated. And will probably remain that way for some time as well, just given that there's a lag typically between, economic growth recovering and employment recovering. So, I think what's interesting for Australia in all of this, and maybe it's part of the saving grace at the moment as well, is that what's happening with Brazil?
COVID, lots of COVID. But they also had a really big issue in terms of their dam collapsed and they were no longer able to export their iron ore, which gave Australia a huge opportunity. And I think that's what most of that actually 23% jump in September of 2020 actually was. It was actually just, we were selling a lot more iron ore to China.
Mm-hmm. So China have a pretty insatiable appetite.
And that's the thing, they haven't done anything with the iron ore. They haven't said a word. They have not said a word.
Right, so they're taking what they need and placing pressure on things that they think, doesn't hurt us that much, but it'll hurt these guys a lot.
Yeah, right? Like, if people can't have their wine, big deal.
Yeah, they'll get it from somewhere else, right? That's exactly it. Now, of course, this means that for Australia, this is a real positive, although the question is for how long? If the diplomatic tensions remain elevated for a couple of years, Brazil will eventually get their act together again. They will hopefully, we hope, recover COVID vaccines and so forth. They'll get their supply back online, and in addition to their deal with Indonesia, to get some iron ore as well, there could be a result where they can start to place Australia under even more pressure by transitioning their purchases of, iron ore to, Brazil. Yes. But we've got a window of time.
Yeah, right? So I think we really have to be proactive with this. Right? We really do need to get on the ball and start looking at alternative options.
That's exactly right. We definitely do. So overall, I think just to sort of wrap things up, I think we can see that, there's a significant impact on trade. At the moment, it hasn't impacted overall trade volume, but it's certainly impacting key industries. The result, therefore, is it's probably having a bigger impact on unemployment in job growth in Australia, particularly around some of these key industries. And also, therefore, because of the sheer levels of uncertainty it's creating, I think particularly impacting in Australia right now, business confidence, business investment. Yeah. Any final comments around the impact at the moment of what we're seeing, Terry?
I think we just got to continue to wait and see, really. I think I do think that surplus that we currently have is going to ease off.
That's right, in terms of the balance of trade surplus.
Because it really is just being propped up by iron ore at the moment. Yeah.
That's right, and so that has interesting implications, of course, for if you're doing the balance of payments, in terms of looking at, and to some extent, external stability, right, in terms of the degree to which that also supports it.
How long will our current account surplus last, probably.
That's right. Well, I think that was a historical anomaly in some respects as well. So definitely, so hopefully you can see that, this relationship with China really bleeds throughout the entire HSC course. There are so many different elements where you could be using it as part of your analysis, right? Referencing it in terms of your trade and protection, referencing it in terms of your balance of payments, referencing it in terms of, government policy, employment, economic growth, business investment. So pay attention
Yeah.
to the reports that you see in the media over the course of this year, because you're going to get great data that you can utilize.
Yeah, it's going to be fantastic because I think, you're just going to have lots of COVID stuff. You're going to have lots of stuff on China. It'll be really interesting just to see, the quality of responses that come through this year.
Awesome.
If you decide to integrate it.
That's right.
Yeah.
Great, guys. So look, stay tuned. We'll do more episodes throughout the year and keep you up to date. If you want more support, make sure A, you hit subscribe to this video. Secondly, both Terry and I lead economics classes here at Art of Smart, where we spend a whole lot more time every week diving into this and, of course, the syllabus itself to make sure that students both know the theory and have a really great understanding of the application of it to the real world. So feel free to get in touch. We'd love to see you in one of the classes in person. But otherwise, see you on the next video.